Well, hello, family. I can't believe how fast the summer is flying by. July's almost over. Right now, there's an event taking place in Tokyo, Japan that has the whole world's attention. I'm speaking, of course, about the Olympics. Over 11,000 athletes representing 200 nations will have participated in 340 events in 33 different sports. One of the sports is track and field. Now, there are many different events in this category. One of them is running. There's long distance running, the 100-meter dash, relay races, and hurdles, just to name a few. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul uses sports metaphors and illustrations when speaking about the Christian journey. We don't really know who wrote the book of Hebrews. Many believe it could be Paul. The writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 12:1 and 2, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith." The Christian life is compared to the effort and exertion of a race in 1 Corinthians 9:24. Paul says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it." 2 Timothy 4:7, Paul says, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith." These few words from Hebrews 12 teach us four things about what it means to run the Christian's race well. First, run the race well by finding your motivator to run. These verses begin with the laying out of some of the motivation that we have to run our Christian race well. That motivation is the example of those who have run it before us. Remember, this verse follows immediately on the heels of the Hall of Faith in chapter 11. There, the author describes a whole host of committed believers who have run their race well. They are to be our examples. That is, we should run the same way they have. More than being our examples, they're also our cheerleaders. In chapter 12, they're now referred to as a cloud of witnesses. Picture running a race on a track, and the stands on every side are filled with people who are cheering for you. Though we can't see it, that's what's going on in the Christian life. We're surrounded by the saints who have gone before, and that's meant to encourage us to run well. If you have ever run a race or sat on the sidelines and watched one, you know the power of hearing people cheer one another on. Someone who is winded and barely able to lift their feet suddenly hears the voices of supporters rallying them on, and just like that, they've renewed their vigor and motivation to keep going. As we run our race, we must remember the example and encouragement set by all believers who have run before us. We should also remember others whom God has graciously placed in our lives: our parents, siblings, pastors, teachers, friends, and mentors. Let their godly example motivate us to run well. Second, run the race well by casting off your weights. We see that in order to run well, we must cast off our weights. Lighter means faster. If runners want to perform their very best, they'll make sure that they're not weighed down by a cumbersome load. In this context, the word weight could refer to extra layers of clothes that slow us down or get in the way. Flowing robes aren't the attire for running. The analogy to the spiritual is explained in the next part. And sin, which clings so closely. Trying to run the Christian race with sin clinging to us is like trying to run a marathon in a wet ballroom gown while carrying a backpack full of bricks. Sin is a weight that ties us down and prevents us from serving Jesus to the best of our ability. We can't afford to be hindered in a race that has such important consequences, so we must cast sin off from us. In your life, what sins might be impeding your progress? There can be some very sticky sins, the kind that Hebrews says cling so closely. Part of the reason some sins are so stubborn is because we don't recognize them as being sins at all. Or at least we don't recognize them as being very serious sins. We tend to excuse certain behaviors such as grumpiness, discontent, gossip, envy, judging others, and swearing. Yet these seemingly less serious sins are the ones that will easily trip us up. They're the ones that weigh us down. Third, run the race well with endurance. The writer of Hebrews says that once we find our motivation and cast off our weights, we need to run with endurance the race that is set before us. Endurance implies that the Christian life is better compared to a marathon than a sprint. It's something that takes work, commitment, and fortitude. It can't be completed without preparation or practice. Otherwise, we will burn out in no time at all. Think about it. You wouldn't run a marathon without any preparation. You don't just show up the day of the race and expect to do well. Rather, you sign up months ahead, sometimes a year ahead. You learn what kind of course it is, if it will be hilly or flat. You learn about the weather, if it'll be hot or cold, and so on. Well, in the Christian life, we must prepare ourselves for what lies ahead. This is what it means to count the cost of following Christ. There's a price to be paid, and it won't be easy. Discipleship requires endurance. Following Jesus will mean trial and tribulations, but we can't allow those hindrances to cause us to give up. And indeed, if we're expecting them and prepared for them, by the Spirit's power, we won't give up. Finally, number 4, run the race well with your eyes on the prize. We want to consider the most important aspect of running our Christian race well, and that is keeping our eyes on the prize. Yes, we need proper motivation and encouragement to run. We need to rid ourselves of things that would encumber our progress. We need to prepare for the long haul. But none of this matters if we don't keep our eyes on the prize. In this case, that doesn't mean a trophy or a finish line. It means looking to Jesus. And this implies we've already begun our race. And now that we have, we must continually keep our gaze fixed forward or upward as opposed to backward. We're not to look back on the things that we have left behind or the weight of sin that we've cast off. They're in the dirt and dust where they belong, whereas we are headed for glory. Let us run toward heaven by keeping the eyes of our heart fixed on the one who is already there, the one who's already run the race and come in first, the one who stands victorious in the heavenly places and is waiting to share that victory with us. Let us keep our minds and hearts fixated on Christ, who holds the prize at the finish line, and He is the prize. As we look at our race to heaven, don't see it as one long race, but rather several races throughout the course. When you're tired, the chances are pretty good that you are closer to the end of that particular leg of the race than you might think. Endure to the end. God will give you rest before the next race. And remember this, according to Galatians 5:16, we're to walk in the Spirit. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:7 that we walk by faith and not by sight. These two verses tell us that we don't have to run constantly. Slow down from time to time and walk with Jesus. Take time to enjoy the journey. Well, family, I hope that this devotion helps you and encourages you to endure to the end. With Jesus, you can make it. Well, thanks again for taking the time to watch and listen today. Until next time, take care and God bless.